Hi, folks. Today we're going to be talking about perspective as it relates to the visual arts. Perspective is just a series of strategies that's used to create the illusion of 3D depth on a 2D surface. In other words, how to make it look like there's space on your flat drawing surface. Um, I'm going to be showing you some images and talking about different strategies for creating the illusion of depth. We're going to be starting with some strategies that are slightly less mathematical, and then moving on to ones that are more mathematical. But don't freak out. It's not math as in adding and subtracting things. It's math as in using grids and lines. So let's talk about non-mathematical ways of creating the illusion of space first. These are going to be pretty intuitive to you because this is how we see, our human eye sees, and we're always processing information in this way. In other words, when we see overlapping shapes, our eye interprets the shapes that are in front of the others as being closer to the objects that are behind us. No, let me say that again. The objects that are in front and are uninterrupted appear to be closer than the ones that are behind them. In other words, if we look at this detail from a Persian manuscript, these figures that are in the front here, they appear to be closer, even though everything about this drawing is kind of flattened in other ways. We interpret the figures that are uninterrupted as being in front of the others. Relative size is another intuitive one. When I think about relative size, I think about those goofy pictures people take where they're like holding the Eiffel Tower and it's in the distance. What you're doing there is playing with relative size because things that are closer to us, they appear to be larger, and things that are in the distance appear to be further away. So it's just the size of one thing relating to the other. Position is also another factor. If you look at the mountains in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that the mountain that is closest to us is the one that is lowest on the picture plane towards the bottom. And likewise with the Persian manuscript, the figures that are lowest on the picture plane appear to be closer to us. Again, this is intuitive, but things that are higher up on a picture plane appear to be further away than the stuff that's lower down. And color intensity is the last one that we'll talk about. Things that are closer to us tend to have more saturation, there's more detail. Because of the atmosphere and the air, as things recede, there are more and more layers of atmospheric stuff that happens. So stuff that's in the distance, like let's look again at the mountains. The mountains in the distance appear to be lighter and have a lot less contrast and detail. That's just because there's so many degrees of atmosphere that get in between us and those mountains in the distance. Let's talk a little bit about some of the more traditional ways of creating the illusion of perspective. So I want to say we're going to talk about different ways that grids and lines are used, but just keep in mind that your eye is experiencing this stuff all the time. So although some of these systems of using lines and grids might not be intuitive at first, just know that they are being used to create the illusions that we see all the time. And basically the illusion is that as things are further away from us, they appear to get smaller. They don't actually get smaller, right? Like if you were to look at a tower in a distance, it would look like it was this big, but when you walk up to it, it's like really big. It's a tower. So it's really an illusion. So the idea with using different types of perspectival techniques is how to recreate this illusion on a 2D space. We're going to talk about two different types of perspective. One of them is called linear perspective, and that's the one on the left with the cube, with the lines that seem to be receding. Linear perspective creates a more traditional version of what our human eye sees. Isometric perspective is less true to nature, and it creates sort of what I think of as a God's eye view, where things seem to stretch on to the distance forever, and it's seen from above, almost like you're a bird flying from above. Let's talk about linear perspective first, because it's the more traditional one. Linear perspective has probably been known to artists for many centuries, but probably some of the earliest versions of linear perspective and their teachings were lost. So, what we have today and what we base most of our teachings off of for folks that are studying this from an art standpoint is perfected during the Italian Renaissance, so Italy in the 1400s. The basic ideas that you're going to need to get down to understand linear perspective is the idea of a horizon and a vanishing point. The horizon line is that line where sky and earth meet, which, depending on what you're drawing, might not always be visible, but it's always present. And the vanishing point is that point on the horizon line where all lines recede. So everything appears to get smaller as it goes back towards the horizon. The traditional example of this is this drawing of a railroad track here. So you can see the horizon line in this drawn example on the lower right falls somewhere around the halfway mark of the page, and the vanishing point is straight down the middle, and you can see that the tracks appear to get smaller. I have also pulled up this little interactive thing on the internet that I have linked to, and in this linear perspective interactive, what we've got is the vanishing point in the middle and the horizon line in the middle currently, but you can drag this vanishing point to different spots. Like if you drag the vanishing point all the way over to the right, you'll see that the room now seems to be receding towards the right, and it almost appears as though you, the viewer, are outside of the room. If I drag the vanishing point all the way up here, and really drag that horizon line way above our eye level, then it seems as though we are flying above the room or viewing it from below. No, above. The room is below us. We're above it. So you can see how playing with vanishing point and the horizon line will dramatically change your perspective in your drawing. Here's an example from Italy, early Renaissance. You can see as they were perfecting linear perspective, folks got really excited about it. And this guy even just went ahead and laid out the imaginary grid that would be created by a one-point linear perspective. He used the marble blocks of the square to recreate that grid. Thinking about this from a perspective point of view, the vanishing point would be right about where the darkness of the door is, and the horizon line is this line that's just slightly above the halfway mark of the picture plane. However, in real life, things are seldom that simple, and typically when we're looking at anything anywhere, it has at least two vanishing points of perspective that it's functioning with. So you can see this is one vanishing point here and one vanishing point here. Typically, there are far more than two vanishing points. Typically, there's sort of infinite vanishing points at everything that we're looking at. And as you try to draw in ways that are truer and truer to life, you'll wind up with multiple point perspective. When you have more than one vanishing point, you don't usually say vanishing, you just say multiple point or 2-point perspective. Here we've got many point perspective in these two examples. And I know some of you in the class are going to be super excited about drawing this way, and others are probably already having a nauseous reaction thinking about using so many straight lines. So I therefore wanted to also present you with the idea of isometric perspective. If you choose to work with isometric perspective, you'll be printing out a gridded sheet of paper like the one on the lower left, and you will be drawing directly onto that grid, meaning that you don't even have to use a ruler if you really don't want to. Let's talk about what isometric perspective is. So isometric is just a word that means equal on all sides. And if you're working with isometric perspective, you're working on a grid that is equal. Isometric perspective does not recreate the illusion of our human eyes. Rather, it creates sort of a seen from above perspective, which is common in art from Asia and the Middle East. If you are familiar with Japanese woodblock prints, traditional ones, many of them use isometric perspective. It's also often used in video games or in things like technical drawings of like engines and mechanical parts and stuff like that. I have on the right just an example from an artist from Instagram that I thought was doing a great job using isometric perspective in this illustration. So typically, when creating an isometric perspective drawing, an artist will just work directly on top of a grid. And I have linked a grid, a PDF grid in Blackboard for you to go ahead and print out if you choose to work with an isometric grid. You can also buy pre-printed grids if this is like your thing and you love doing this type of drawing. Historically, before CAD, mechanical engineers, people like that would use isometric grids to plan out their projects of various kinds. So that's why these things exist. In this example here, it's Japanese woodblock print from the early 1800s, probably. You can see that the artist is working on an isometric grid to lay out this whole world. So that's one thing that isometric perspective is really good at, is creating an entire scene where everything is seen with the same depth of detail and intensity, but while still creating an illusion of space. You can imagine if this was linear perspective, you wouldn't be able to see all the details of the clothing and the living situations and everybody's faces. It would all get mashed as everything got smaller, going towards a vanishing point. But isometric perspective allows you to have this God's eye view where you can kind of see everything from above at the same level of detail. And finally, just some stills from some classic video games like Sims and Sonic 3D Blast. You can see a lot of them were laid out on that isometric grid as well, because it allows you to have a clear view of your entire world. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. I hope that kind of cleared up some of the ideas of perspective that we are using this week, and I look forward to seeing your work.